Um, and I believe you need to consent to this recording as well. Prior to the end of the session, I will share the URL to the session evaluation survey. And if you have any questions, just let us know. Allie, Wendy, take it away.
Thank you, Jason. So welcome to Outteach. We go beyond the four walls of your classroom and outside expectations. We're really happy to be here today. Allie and I both are very passionate about today's topic, which is equity in the outdoors and using outdoor spaces to promote scientific inquiry. So a little bit about our learning objectives for this session. During this webinar, we are hoping that you will walk away with a deeper understanding of how phenomenon drives scientific inquiry. Also that you'll learn a practical way to design and deliver instruction outdoors, and we'll differentiate between the types of inquiry that start with outdoor phenomenon and make those connections to literacy within scientific inquiry. So a little more formal introductions about who we are. My name is Wendy Kelly. I've worked as an instructional coach with Outteach since 2016. Prior to that, I spent 10 years in the classroom. I was a master science teacher for Dallas ISD. And then I worked 10 years as a district math and science coach, and I supported teachers in their use of data to drive instruction. But I really came to Outteach because I believed in their mission, and I believe in getting kids outside and giving them experiences that they wouldn't normally get, again, indoors within those four walls. So we have to provide those experiences. I truly believe in order to help kids master difficult concepts. That's a little bit about me.
Hi, my name is Allie Graybeal. I'm also an instructional specialist with Outteach. I joined Outteach in 2019, and I do curriculum writing and provide one-on-one job coaching for Outteach. Before coming to Outteach, I worked for 8 years as a 5th grade math and science teacher in both Charlotte-Mecklenburg and Cabarrus County schools. Those are both in North Carolina. And during that time, I was able to have opportunities to write curriculum, deliver professional development. But while serving in the classroom, I started my kind of experience with outdoor experiential learning by taking students outside for science, teaching things like ecosystems or weather really kind of lent themselves to outdoor learning. Why not take students outside for those? But when I started to see the level of engagement and inquiry that naturally happened in the outdoor spaces, I started thinking about ways to take students outside for all subjects and integration. And even outdoor exploration got to the point in my classroom where students were asking, when is the next time we can go outside? When can we do inquiry outside? And so that's really what led me to Outteach, was seeing the transformative nature it had in my classroom, but also seeing the level of engagement and the curiosity and just the excitement my students had when I took them into our outdoor spaces. So that's a little bit about us. And here's a little bit about what we do at Outteach. So at Outteach, we partner with districts and schools to take experiences with our students into the outdoor spaces. And so we provide job embedded coaching and professional development, including the kind of professional development we are speaking to you about today. And then we also work with teachers one-on-one. We also provide standard aligned curriculum and resources through our online platform. And then you can see in Wendy and I's background, that we also do outdoor learning labs and provide tools that enhance experiential learning. So the one, they're kind of reversed. Wendy's in Texas, but her background is one of our school learning labs that we did here in North Carolina. And mine is one of the learning labs that we have built in Texas. And so Outteach is a national organization. We have kind of our hubs in the DC, North Carolina, Georgia, and Texas areas, but we're always broadening that, and we're finding that the opportunities like we have today helps us reach students all across the country. So what does effective teaching outdoors look like? We took to social media and polled over 100 people, just asking them, what are 3 qualities that you would want to see in your child's teacher? We asked this a couple of months ago as we were kind of coming out of this full-time at-home learning and back into some versions of in-person school. And the results that we found or that we received were pretty much the same. We were looking for teachers who are experienced, who were accommodating, and who are creative. And when we say experienced and we asked the police to elaborate, they were telling us experienced as in lifelong learners. They want their teachers of their students and their children to always be learning, to always be continuing to work on their craft, accommodating in that they're able to teach to a variety of learning styles, including being able to take students into the outdoor space, but understanding that not all students learn the same and that every student is kind of met where they are with the learning styles that they have. And then creativity, always looking to be creative and finding new ways to engage students and to drive that critical thinking and to really push their curiosity and be innovative. And so those are some of the things that we found are characteristics of highly qualified and highly effective teachers. And so when we think about effective teachers, we think about their understanding to create meaningful experiences. And if you think back to the last slide, that's one of the things that kept popping up in our informal social media poll, is that they wanted teachers to be creative. And so having these creative and meaningful experiences. In addition, effective science teachers can accommodate individual student needs. Well, if you think back, accommodating was also one of the things that in our poll, people said they would like to have in their child's teacher, being able to accommodate the individual needs of students. And then experienced was the third one on the previous slide. And so effective science teachers have a deep understanding of content and the concepts they're teaching. And so if we are to enhance students' scientific literacy, we have to be scientifically literate ourselves. And so we pulled some research from Horizon, from the No Child Left Behind in 2015, and we found that a barrier for K-5 teachers that are thrust into a science classroom is that they don't have proper training. Wendy and I have had the conversation that when I graduated from college with my degree in elementary education, I had taken one science course, one course on how to effectively teach science in the classroom. And so when we looked into that a little deeper, we found that of graduates who are graduating from college with a degree in elementary education, 76% of them felt qualified in reading, 60% of them felt qualified in math, but only 24% felt qualified in science. And so we find that many elementary teachers coming into the classroom, they're not getting the courses and the focus on that scientific content and that scientific pedagogy that they need to feel confident in the classroom. And that's why we really appreciate you coming to our 45-minute session today, just to prepare yourself to take learning beyond the four walls of your classroom and outdoors into outdoor spaces. So what do effective teachers do differently in science or across all content areas? But we encourage teachers to move from a structured or guided activity to a more student-initiated inquiry. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like later in this session. We've talked a little bit previously on understanding the conceptual development that's required by students to grasp difficult concepts. And so NGSS has helped with this a lot, kind of building from K through 5 and beyond on those concepts, building them gradually. Provide experiences which students may not otherwise experience in their daily lives. And so this session is really, we want to hit on equity. And so thinking about experiences that your students can have right outside the four walls of your classroom that pique their curiosity, but also provide them with an experience that they may not get anywhere else. And then your teaching moves from assessment-centered to knowledge-centered to student-centered. And so thinking about how we can move away from teaching to the test and more towards building upon students' natural curiosity. If you listen to your students when you're taking them to the buses or you take them outside, they have so many questions. And in my classroom, I used to write those questions down. What is this? What did it eat? Where did it come from? Why does the sky look like this? What would happen if this? Writing those questions down and putting them in your classroom, and then thinking about how you can incorporate those into upcoming standards or content or development for your students, so that they're really taking those the questions that your students have and integrating them into the curriculum.
Okay, so outdoor phenomenon and inquiry. So it all begins with the outdoors, and phenomenon is not to be confused with phenomenal, although that's what it turns into most times for young learners. You know, right outside your door is everything you need to create that curiosity and to build those concepts out for students in a real world setting. So, and did I mention it's free, right? Outdoor phenomenon is free. So here are some images, and I would like to ask you if you'd like to, you know, just jot down in a journal, notebook, or on a piece of paper, which of these are examples of phenomenon and which would not be considered examples of outdoor phenomenon based on NGSS and NSTA's interpretation of outdoor phenomenon. So I'm going to give you just 1 minute to do that. Examples and non-examples. Okay, so let's take a look at the definition for outdoor phenomenon. So these are observable events that we could use scientific knowledge to explain or to make predictions about. So really outdoor phenomenon kind of falls into, it has to meet these specific categories. Number one, is it something that I can observe or that students can observe, use their senses to make predictions about? Does it create curiosity and wondering? Does it make students want to collect data, to do research? Is it something that they can relate to in their own lives? Is it something that they could collect data on or images from over time? Is it something that can make sense to students? In our case, in Texas, does it align to TEKS or does it align to Common Core, to NGSS? And is it something, is it an event or an object that students could engage with for multiple days or weeks? So interestingly, going back, there were some ravens right outside of my office window, and I noticed, and not predictably, but they would come to the puddle outside and they would bring food, and it looked like they were washing the food. And so, you know, I observed them over several days, and I noticed that they didn't do it every time. Sometimes they'd drop their food into the grass and then they'd go drink water out of the puddle. So, you know, after some data collection and some research, what I learned is that this is actually a behavior of ravens. They will soften food to make it easier for their young to digest. So again, kind of concluding that ravens were doing that, there must be, you know, a nest nearby. So I'd like to kind of see how many of you were able to select the images that are not considered phenomenon. So the first one, shooting stars, although it's a phenomenal event, it doesn't, categorically, it doesn't meet all of these criteria. It's a one-time event. The same with extreme weather. So again, it's due to their limited engagement. Tornadoes, shooting stars would not actually fall into the category of outdoor phenomenon. And I don't know if in the chat, if anyone has questions or comments about that, but I'll take us on a little walk around my neighborhood. So I took my camera on a walk with me. and my dog was along, I'm not gonna lie. And I just took pictures of things that I found interesting. When I came back, I actually pulled out a state release test from 2019, and I used those photographic images and questions from that release test to create wondering statements. So the first thing I wondered, how long in this heat would it take for this puddle to change states from liquid to a gas? How many days would that take? I also I then wondered, looking at the raven washing food and then looking at my stray cat who has adopted us. This is Jim. I wonder how environment actually affects animals and their behavior. I also went a little further down to the local playground, and I wondered if these particular building materials were chosen on purpose due to their conductivity. You know, it's real hot here in Texas, so I'm sure that, you know, the physical properties of matter were taken into consideration. And then I saw guys on the corner, you know, digging up our sidewalks, and thought, I wonder how many mixtures I could create just from this pile of rubble, and how, using physical properties, I would separate those materials in that mixture. I also gathered some evidence just right outside my front door. I noticed that the sun in its position in the sky at 9 a.m. and then again at noon. I wondered where it would be in 3 hours time if I could predict the angle of the sun just based on this evidence. Then I took it a step further and noticed that my husband had actually corrected a problem we were having whenever the garbage men came by with their trucks, right? And so I wondered if the pushing force required to move this rock changed when he changed the ground, leveled things out, and actually added small gravel to that corner of our property. That, again, all these aligned to state standardized test questions. I just took out A, B, C, D choices, and I added a wondering statement. I also noticed that down the street, our neighbors, and they're having like real problem. Whenever it rains here in Texas, it's quite biblical rain. So soil sediment is oftentimes washed away. So in this next photograph, you'll see what's happening. You'll see what's happening to the tree in their side yard. Now, is water the only thing that's causing this? I wonder if it's just water. But more importantly, I also wondered for students, how could this process be slowed down or stopped altogether? So here, again, we're asking students to engineer solutions to problems that they see every day, whether it's weathered sidewalk or erosion in the schoolyard or on the playground. They can conduct these outdoor investigations. They'd be asked to which tools they would use, what evidence that they would collect, and how it would be recorded. There's opportunities here for students to measure and analyze their results, construct explanations from evidence, and even communicate those conclusions with others. So again, we're bringing in all those process skills. We're bringing in STEM, engineering, and math. Outdoor phenomenon is such an incredible springboard for kids to learn.
All right, thanks, Wendy. So we have just a little bit more about inquiry science. And so as it says here, the National Science Research Council lays the foundation for developing scientific literacy in children. And so Wendy and I put them together in these 3 boxes as doing science, understanding science, and then the pedagogy and practice of science. And so you see that in the first 2 boxes, it's on what the students are doing. So the students should be doing science. They should be asking questions and planning and conducting investigations, kind of like Wendy was speaking about in those photos. And so you notice that going outside hit many of her TEAC standards in Texas. In North Carolina, we use state standards, but also next gen standards as well, or the standards that you're working with in your state. Students are out there conducting investigations or asking questions. Why does the raven stop here every day? Why are we seeing this soil and dirt moved away on our playground? why are we using these materials? So actually doing the science and then coming up themselves with the investigation to answer their own questions. The understanding science piece, understanding how and why knowledge changes in response to new evidence. So always seeing that we're always questioning in science and we're always learning and we're always gaining more knowledge. And so that's what's happening with your students in the classroom as well. And then on the part of the teacher, the pedagogy and the practice of science, it's about planning the lessons to promote this in students. And so at Outteach, we use the 5E model, which is the engage, explore, explain, elaborate, extend, and evaluate. And so that provides that engagement piece or that outdoor exploration piece prior to the teacher stepping in and making sense of that in the explanation portion. So of course, we understand that the abilities of our students are all kind of necessary for this to take place. And so skilled teachers will move between these variations based on their own skilled set. So we have the types of inquiry here, and we're going to take you kind of through those in just a minute with an experience we're going to ask you to have. And so we see here that there's structured inquiry, guided inquiry, and then the student-initiated inquiry. And like I was saying, of course, we have to understand the abilities of our students that are necessary for these different levels of inquiry to take place, but moving between each will help the students develop the cognitive skills necessary to be successful in science, and it'll level that playing field for all students. And so to achieve the end result of student-initiated inquiry, students first have to learn to ask evaluative questions, understand the difference between evidence and opinion, and develop their own explanations based on science. And so obviously this takes time and requires more skill. And so Wendy and I were having a conversation just prior to this session today about kind of the interesting things we may see moving back into the classroom space, whether that is 5 days a week or some kind of hybrid schedule. But what will this look like stepping back into some sense of normalcy for the first time in really 2 school years, at least 1.5 school years. So in previous years, maybe if you taught in a higher grade level, you could start out with guided inquiry and move to student-initiated inquiry, whereas this year we may need to start back with some structured inquiry. And so the end result, regardless of grade level, would be that student-initiated inquiry, but having the understanding that we move between the 3 of them to ultimately get to students generating their own questions and then designing their own investigations.
So back at the start of this webinar, I had mentioned that we need to give our students experiences. And in several of our trainings, when we're working with a full staff at a campus, we will invite participants to actually share a nature story that they have, because everyone has a nature story, a time where they deeply connected to nature in some powerful way. And so I'm going to share a little bit of mine. So this is my dad and I in 1972. And he was a farmer. I'm a farmer's daughter. I feel very blessed that I was born and raised that way. Farmers are always assessing the weather, the seasons, because that dictates every decision that they make when it comes to planting, when it comes to harvesting. I can tell you that, Dad gave my brother and me so many rich experiences. I can tell you at age 8, Doug and I we built like livable snow structures. I mean, Dad taught us how to harvest water by building solar stills. We could make a meal out of the plants just growing in our ditch out back. And he even taught us how to entertain ourselves with a simple blade of grass. So I brought in that standard, how is sound made, or how do you make sound? And you want to talk about free and easy. I'm going to encourage you, if you have access to the outdoors, to walk outside. I would like you to grab a blade of grass. It has to be about as long as your thumb. So, and we are going to investigate this question and talk about the different types of inquiry. We're going to talk about this a little further. So how can you make sound? I want you to go out, grab a piece of grass, If you don't have access to the outdoors, you could maybe take a piece of paper and you could cut or tear it. So it's about the same width as a blade of grass and the length of your thumb, or you could even take from maybe a houseplant, a non-toxic houseplant in your room, and you could take a leaf off that. And just as long as it's about as long as your thumb is, and we will return in about 5 minutes.
Okay, welcome back. Hopefully you were able to get outdoors and grab a long piece of grass. I know that if we in the chat, we had at least one participant who was able to do that. If you're in a situation this coming year where you have some students who remain virtual, or you are the virtual teacher, we have found that providing the opportunity to, you want to still provide the opportunity for all students to participate. So sometimes it is helpful to give them the assignment ahead of time, or ask them to maybe gather materials ahead of time. We've also found that giving a 24-hour turnaround time before coming back and talking about what, if they were able to make sound, if they were able to gather a material, is great, because sometimes in that moment they don't have a grown-up's permission to go outside. And so giving them the opportunity, even over like a weekend or something, to be able to do that is helpful. And then as a last resort, being able to look for something in the home. And then that gives them the opportunity to come back and provide a different perspective. So for example, if you have a student who's not able to access the outdoors safely or with a grown-up's permission, then they could try paper, or they could try ribbon, or they could try something around their house and see if it yields the same results or produces the same results. If it does, great. Why? If it doesn't, okay, well, why doesn't it? And so there's some great kind of critical thinking conversations you can have around those as well. And so thinking about this investigation, how can we make sound, thinking about that question, and then thinking about the 3 levels of inquiry that we've talked about previously, we want to give you an example kind of what each of those may look like in your classroom. And so for structured inquiry, remember that this is the one that is really teacher driven. And so the teacher would say something along the lines of, take a piece of grass, place it between your 2 thumbs and blow. What do you hear? And so that would produce the sound. If they can get that grass kind of tight enough in between their thumbs and they blow, they should hear a sound. And so again, the teacher's telling them here kind of what to do. It's very structured and teacher-led, teacher-driven. And then the student would blow air and notice that buzzing sound. And then to follow up, the teacher would say, let's see if we can make it like an instrument. Hold the blade even more tightly and try again. And what the student should notice is that the sound is changing, or they might notice that their lips is tingling. So again, the teacher has given 2 pieces of direct instruction right here, telling them what to do. The students don't have much autonomy in this. It is really just teacher driven. And then the teacher may say, what can you say about how we make noise with air? And then the students may say, students identify that sound is happening because air moves back and forth over the blade of grass. So using that outdoor experience of going outdoors and collecting a piece of grass, this is what structured inquiry would look like when answering the question, how can we make sound? Moving into guided inquiry, this is less teacher-driven, puts a little bit more focus on the students and their curiosity and them guiding that inquiry. The teacher may say, what would happen if you changed your blade of grass? Predict what that sound might, or what that might sound like. So again, they've kind of figured out how to make the blade of grass produce sound. And then the teacher may ask, what would happen if you changed your blade of grass? So with structured inquiry, we said, pull it tighter and see what happens. This one's saying, what would happen if we changed our blade of grass? So that might look like a taller piece of grass, or a smaller piece of grass, or a wider, or a less wide, or it could be that they pull it tighter or they pull it loose. So there's some autonomy here for the students. Students are given several choices, but are not told what to do. Okay. And then some may decide, some may ask questions like, what if it's not grass? What if it's a leaf? Or what if it's from a weed? Or what if it's for a petal from a flower? And so it may guide them in that direction. Another example of guided inquiry would be the teacher saying, can you demonstrate your sound? What did you discover about the length or shape of your leaf? Why do you think the sound changed? And then the students may be able to figure out on their own that the length or the shape of a leaf changes the pitch, and that a leaf that's wider and more coarse versus thin and fine produces more of that vibration, more of that sound. And so again, it's kind of, we started off with structured, now we've moved to guided, and then the ultimate kind of goal is student-initiated inquiry. And so the teacher would say something like, what would you like to learn more about when it comes to sound? what are ways you could test your questions? And so we talked about this earlier. If you're learning about sound in the classroom, you may find that when you take your students outdoors for recess, or your students are having experiences at home, or they're on the bus going home, they may start thinking about sounds. They may hear sounds. They might start questioning those sounds. And so when they're able to come up with their own questions that they have about sound, and then come up with their own plan for testing those using the scientific and engineering design process, or collaborating with other students, they're going to come up with a way to answer their own questions. And so students can brainstorm a wide variety of questions that can be recorded on something like a wandering wall or some kind of virtual platform. And then, for example, they might wonder how sound travels and how far it will go. So how far can you hear that blade of grass in comparison to something like the metal on the playground or the flower that another student used? And they may have questions about volume. How can I make my blade of grass sound very loud or very soft? They may want to compare man-made sounds like that metal that they hear to those they find in nature. So what about sticks, or what about plants, or just things like that? So you'll find that in these inquiry and in these through inquiry and in these investigations and experiences really does lead to a lot more questions that they can then answer on their own.
Great. So let's put it all together. This is what it would look and sound like. Teacher moves and student moves through investigation, the outdoors. So again, engage students. In this case, it was engaging them with how sound is created. So we initiate the task. We use outdoor phenomenon to do it. We are basically assessing prior knowledge and what students already know, kind of setting the stage. And then, students show interest, and nature is just naturally interesting for students. They can describe what they're hearing, what they're experiencing already, if they've never had the experience. During the Explore, teachers are moving from a concrete experience, a structured, prescriptive type of inquiry, to guided to student initiated. And as Allie mentioned, this gives all students the opportunity to engage at whatever level. It kind of equals the playing field a little bit for them. Students can test their predictions, record their ideas. They're working collaboratively, exchanging ideas in groups. And then during the explain portion in the 5E model, teachers are listening to what students are saying and recording those ideas and providing that formal vocabulary, that academic language. This is where we're introducing them to things like pitch and volume and vibration, and how vibration travels differently through different types of matter. And then students are assimilating those new ideas, and they're reading materials for more information so they can understand the concepts that are being introduced to them. During the elaborative piece, teachers are providing other avenues for students to extend their learning. For instance, a teacher might provide, instruments, or things like telephones or radios, and students might get a chance to kind of delve into those and how those work. They can investigate new questions on their own. They can demonstrate their understanding in new and different ways, and talking about natural sounds, man-made sounds. And finally, teachers evaluating, planning those deep assessing and advancing questions that drive critical thinking. Students can construct those responses using claim evidence reasoning. So that's just kind of what it looks like with outdoor phenomenon as a springboard for teachers and students. Now, literacy, we're going to just kind of touch on that briefly since we only have 5 minutes left, but scientists and good readers really have the same skill sets, don't they? They observe, they predict, they classify, they compare. Research shows that good teachers of science incorporate literacy into their classroom often. So having a wide variety of books is important to motivate students and help them make connections to the real world. You know, good literature reinforces the idea that science is part of the world around them, and it nurtures their interests, gives them a sense of wonder, builds on that curiosity. It bridges that gap between, culture and gender. Again, just giving them more of a sense of what kind of career paths that they might be interested in. So just, looking at this briefly through the Engage, we're looking at short reading passages, pictures, graphic organizers, KWL charts. Many of you are already familiar with all of this. In the Explore, what that might look like. Good think alouds, read alouds, reflective writing. Of course, students are taking their journals outdoors. They're writing, they're illustrating, they're labeling, they're posing questions. Those I wonder questions, right? So I always had my students use a portion of the back of their science journals for their own wondering wall, and this gave them just a great sense of ownership. Like, I wonder, do birds adopt new nests if they're not their nest originally? Great questions, great research ideas, great scientific, science investigations, explaining. Again, we want students to look for the answers. We don't want to give them the answers. So in the explain portion of the lesson, our students reading from good, rich, content related materials and sharing evidence and providing explanations. They can elaborate through debate, through reports, fictional stories. They can interview an expert. They can write reflective summaries and so on. So, that's just a little bit about, what literacy in the science classroom looks like. So we are kind of opening this up for any questions that you might have, and you can stay in touch with us again through OutTeach Education, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. Any questions for us? We can take them in the chat.
Or you can unmute yourself.
Or unmute yourself, because we have such an intimate little group. It's kind of fun. Question, is outdoor phenomenon for the initial Engage only? It doesn't have to be used exclusively for the initial Engage. Anything of interest to students goes a long way in getting them invested in what they're learning. But I have used outdoor phenomenon that students might find evidence after reading a particular informational text. So, they've looked for evidence on pest damage, on animal characteristics, on pollinating, all those things. So it's not just the initial Engage. It can be used during the elaboration or the exploration phase of any lesson too. Good question.
Wendy, would you go broader for the anchor phenomena?
Maybe I need a little bit more. Maybe, do you understand that question? Go broader.
I'm not sure. I'm thinking like, are you thinking broader than like sound, or are you thinking? Because we anchored the example that we just gave was anchored in a blade of grass. So, you obviously could go much broader, especially if it was the student inquiry. Anchor is unit-wide investigative sound.
Mm. Thank you, Marley. What do good teachers of science have? What do they have in common? I'm sure you could speak to this too, Allie, but good teachers, I noticed good science teachers know their standards. They have very clear objectives. They have their materials are always close at hand. They've planned For inquiry, they've planned the types of questions that they'll ask their students. I think that that's incredibly important when you are creating essential questions for an enduring understanding of concepts, that you have those ahead of time for students. And I think when you do that, then you have plenty of time to teach science. When you know your standards and you're well planned, and science fits in beautifully to any content area, whether it's math or reading or social studies.
And then the last question, are there any more easy things to inspire curiosity outside? And I would say ask your students, what are they curious about? A rock, a bug? Like we have some of our curriculum is around literally a rock.
Mhm.
So not just we do a blade of grass, but a rock, or why plants are dying, or why plants are like, what curiosity do your students have? And then taking that and using that as the springboard for an investigative lesson with your students.
Mhm.
All right, well, it is 1:31. We thank you so much for joining us today. You can stay in touch. Our emails were in the beginning. I listed mine in the chat. Wendy can list hers now. If you have any further questions, feel free to follow up. And then you can look for our curriculum and resources that will be coming very soon on OER Commons.